the road again. Just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making music with my friends.
Good morning. Ready to get on the road again? You will go to places you've never been and see things you've never experienced. That's what happens when you get on the road with Jesus. Back then and today. We're in part 3 this morning of On the Road with Jesus. We've looked at the journey of the heart and the journey of life. This morning we're going to look at the journey of trust. Probably one of the more difficult journeys that we're going to take this morning. Now, one of the most fascinating, moving, and intimate stories in all of the New Testament is John chapter 11. It's the story of the raising of Lazarus. The events of this chapter take place in a little village called Bethany. It's only 2 miles from Jerusalem, and this event takes place sometime around January, February of AD 30. The crucifixion is just 3 months away. So it's very, very close to the end of Jesus' earthly life. Now, this is the 7th miracle of Jesus that's recorded by John. John loves the system of numbers which are symbolic of things. You'll see this in all of John's writings, especially in Revelation, but you see it here. This is the 7th miracle of Jesus that he records in that gospel. He records a number of other 7s. And this is the greatest triumph of all, of course, before the cross. Now, there's a lot of people involved in this story. There's Mary, Martha, the disciples, Thomas, friends of the family, and Jesus himself, of course. But I want to focus on Mary and Martha. And normally, one of our difficulties when we get on the road with Jesus is we've heard these stories and we skip to the end. And there's something going on before you get to the end that's very, very instructive for our life. And that's what we're going to focus on this morning, is the story of Mary and Martha. They're going to go on a very difficult journey of trust. And sometime in our life, if you haven't already, you will face this journey. It's a common journey of all people. So let me read verses 1 and 2 as we begin to get the setting. A man named Lazarus was sick. He lived in Bethany with his sisters, Mary and Martha. This is the Mary who poured the expensive perfume on the Lord's feet and wiped them with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was sick. Now, some interesting things right there. First of all, it's called the village of Mary and Martha. Well, that implies that they're quite well known. Now, remember, John writes toward the end of the 1st century. So this is many years after this event. And Mary and Martha, of course, are quite well known, as would, of course, been Lazarus. He's assuming you're familiar with Luke chapter 10, where we're introduced to the sisters in another very familiar story. And then in verse 2, he's assuming we're familiar with Mark 14, where a woman anointed Jesus' feet. John is going to give his own version of that story in the very next chapter, which is also a very interesting chapter, John chapter 12. Now, it's implied in all these passages that Martha is the oldest and Lazarus is the youngest. They had a home in which Jesus had been made welcome, one in which he would spend even more time before the cross. There's going to be more stories about this. So on this occasion, however, there's a problem, and that's Lazarus is sick. So in verse 3, it says, "So the 2 sisters sent a message to Jesus telling him, 'Lord, the one you love is sick.' Now, apparently, Lazarus' condition grew worse, so the sisters sent an urgent message to Jesus, and notice several things about their message here. First of all, their immediate reaction was to turn to Jesus. Now, sometimes, we kind of wait till the last thing before we turn to Jesus. We try everything else, and then if that doesn't work, we turn to Jesus. They did that immediately. Second, notice the basis of their appeal. The one you love. This is an interesting word here. The one you love is sick. The word love here is phileo. The beginning of Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. Phileo is love between family members, a love that is warm, affectionate love. Jesus had a really close relationship with this family, and he had a close relationship with Lazarus. There's a deep bond between him and this family. And then thirdly, they don't try to tell Jesus what to do. They simply tell him what is happening, and they assume when he hears, he'll do what needs to be done. So that's evidence of a very strong faith that in our circumstances, we don't try to impose our will upon God. We wait on him. So let's go to verses 4 to 7. But when Jesus heard about it, he said, Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. No, it is for the glory of God. I, the Son of God, will receive glory from this. Although Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, He stayed where he was for the next 2 days and did not go to them. Finally, after 2 days, he said to his disciples, "Let's go to Judea again." Now, the final outcome, Jesus is saying, won't be death, it'll be the glory of God. Now, if it took the messenger 2 days, remember, they're just traveling by foot, so it takes a long time to make these trips. So if it took the messenger 2 days to get to Jesus and then 2 days to return to Bethany, when the messenger got back with this message from Jesus to the sisters, Lazarus would have already been dead. Now, just think about that. This is part of the story we kind of miss. How would the sisters felt about that? They had sent a message to Jesus, hey, the one you love is sick. And by the time they get the message back, the one he loves is dead. How would they have reacted? Would their faith be shattered? Would they leave it in Jesus' hands? Where would they be at this particular point in this story? Now, the emphasis is on Jesus' love. Notice he says here, although Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, John is just saying he's not delaying because he doesn't love them. And here he uses the word agape for love, godly love, sacrificial love. We need to always remember that delay does not mean Jesus doesn't care. Boy, we need to remember that all the time. Delay does not mean he doesn't care, and we'll see that well in a moment. Well, now he meets Martha. He's on his way back, and he meets Martha. 17 to 22. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. Bethany was only a few miles down the road from Jerusalem, and many of the people had come to pay their respects and console Mary and Martha on their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. She went out to meet him before he even got there. But Mary stayed at home. Now Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask." Now there was a rabbinical tradition among the Jews that the soul stayed around the body for 3 days in hopes of reunion. But after 3 days, the body began to decompose and the spirit left. Now that wasn't scriptural, but it may have been a common belief. I think that's the significance of the 4 days. Now, if so, this enhances, of course, the greatness of the miracle, which would have been true anyway because the body had begun to decompose. So Jesus is apparently on the outskirts of town. Martha goes to meet him, and we see in her words sort of faith and despair side by side. She knew Jesus could have healed him, but he wasn't there. Now, I don't know that she's saying this in reproach to Jesus. I think she's just saying it in deep grief. I just wish you had made it. That kind of thing. I just wish you had gotten here on time. But I still think God can work through you. Now, we don't really know what she was thinking at that point. I think she's in the midst of a raging emotional battle. Faith, doubt, despair, hope. Ever been there? Get in those things where you don't know which way you're going to go. Difficult experience. Now, in the midst of this despair, yet faith, this valley of tears, Jesus sees an opportunity to deepen this disciples' trust and make it richer than ever before. And so he continues the conversation in 23 to 27. So Jesus told her, "Your brother will rise again." "Yes," Martha said, "when everyone else rises on resurrection day." So she believed that. Jesus told her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die like everyone else, will live again. They are given eternal life for believing in me and will never perish. Do you believe this, Martha?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I have always believed that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who has come into the world from God." A lot of things are said here. First of all, she believes in the resurrection on the last day, at the end time, when God intervenes in judgment in human history. Now, that was a common belief among Jews in the first century. Sometimes we don't realize that. A lot of the Pharisees, remember there was this raging battle between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The Sadducees were the secularists of their day. They didn't believe in any resurrection. You died and that was the end of it. The Pharisees believed, there would be a resurrection and you would live forever with God. And so Martha believed that. Jesus, of course, taught that. But Jesus wants to take her to a depth of understanding exceeding what she already believes. She needs to understand the basis of that resurrection. And here, once again, this is John's 5th I am of Jesus. He has 7 of those also in the Gospel of John. Now remember when God met Moses at the burning bush and Moses asked his name, you remember what God said? I am that I am. And so Jesus picks up. And that became the word Yahweh for God in the Old Testament, the covenant God, the God who has relationship with us. And so Jesus uses that now. I am the resurrection and the life. I'm the one who can conquer death both now and forever, and that's available to those who put their trust in me. Now, it's important that we understand what he says at this point, because the miracle he's about to perform is not an end in itself. It's an illustration of who Christ is for those who trust him. Those who trust me will live forever, eternally. Huge thing here. And Martha makes this incredible confession, a comprehensive, remarkable confession, very similar to Peter's that we have in Matthew 16:16. I believe you're the Messiah, that God promised would one day come, that you are the Son of God. Now, you might remember, Martha is making this confession under very trying circumstances. We always need to put context to these things. And the context of her making this confession is she just lost her brother, and she's mourning. She's mourning over the loss of her brother. It may be a dark night in our life when Christ calls us to our highest level of faith and trust in him. He's telling Martha right where she is in her circumstances, psychological and emotional turmoil, confusion and despair, to trust him. To trust him. And Martha did. And Martha did. Well, let's go on to the story. 28:32. Then she left him and returned to Mary, her sister. She called Mary aside from the mourners and told her, the teacher is here and wants to see you. Apparently Jesus said, go tell Mary I need to talk to her too. That's a great little pause right there. So Mary immediately went to Jesus. Now Jesus had stayed outside the village at the place where Martha had met him. When the people who were at the house trying to console Mary saw her leave so hastily, they assumed that she was going to Lazarus' grave to weep. So they followed her there. When Mary arrived and saw Jesus, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So Jesus wants to meet with Mary too. However, the mourners are there with her, and they follow her out where she meets Jesus. So it wasn't a private meeting at all. There was probably a whole lot of people around when Jesus is trying to talk to her. But notice what she does. In Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42, when Jesus was visiting in their home under happy circumstances, when the sun was shining, Mary sat at his feet for quietness and meditation. Now, when the storm clouds of sorrow had come, when her heart was breaking over the loss of her brother, she returns to the same spot, the feet of Jesus. Learn a lot from Mary. So, what does this story teach us? There's some huge lessons here before we ever even get to the raising of Lazarus. First of all, delay. When we're facing a struggle, a difficult time, a valley of tears, an answer from God that doesn't seem to come, that doesn't mean he doesn't care. See, that's the key point here. Doesn't mean he doesn't care. The death of Christ should always remind us that God cares more than we can ever fathom. Remember, Jesus died on a cross. We have not been abandoned. I have been with a lot of folks over the years as a pastor at the death of a loved one. That's just common for a pastor to be in those kinds of situations. And it's very important when you lose a loved one or when you're going through a devastating sickness to understand you have not been abandoned. God's love is still there. Remember, one of the most beautiful things about this story that's easily overlooked is when Jesus gets to the grave. He finally travels with the sisters to the graveside before he raises Lazarus. And there's a lot of friends there and family there and Mary and Martha there. And what does Jesus do when he gets there? Before he raises Lazarus, he weeps. He weeps. He doesn't tell them, I have all the answers and I can tell you how things are going to work out. He doesn't do any of that. He just weeps. He weeps with them. That can mean a lot. That can mean a lot. He weeps with them. So delay doesn't mean he doesn't care. Secondly, is surprise. God may not respond the way we expect him to or ask him to. And I'm sure we've all experienced that. He's full of surprises. He's full of surprises. This is where we need to keep an air of expectancy and not expectation. Martha seemed to have that when she said, but even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask. The problem with expectations is that they can drive us further into despair. Well, I asked God to do so-and-so, and he didn't do it, so I just give up. Don't do that. See, that's an expectation. Don't have that. Have an expectancy that you're just going to wait and see what God does. You're going to wait and see what he does, because you don't know what he'll do. And we need to be so careful about that. God is full of surprises. Me standing here today is a giant surprise to my wife and me. Okay. I was retired. I was goofing off a lot. And God told me that you goofed off long enough. You need to do something. I didn't think about it being this. So see, God is full of surprises. So don't limit God in what he might do. The third thing is faith or trust. When our journey is difficult for whatever reason, Jesus may deepen our faith in a way that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. Trusting when things are dark is not easy, but we are confronted with this many times in life, most frequently in medical situations, in death, in divorce, and all those things that hurt so badly in life. And they do hurt so badly. If the Lord never gives us children, will you still love him? Wow. And notice, and I like this in the video, she doesn't give an answer. She doesn't give an answer, because many times in these kinds of situations in life, we don't have an immediate answer. And one of the biggest things you need to not do is make up answers for somebody else. I've seen that so very often. Don't make up answers for people. Don't give responses for which you don't know the answer. Just be there with them like Jesus did and weep with them. I could tell you so many stories there that are so painful that I've seen over so many years. Tell you a little bit lighter one. You know, I'm a cancer survivor. I went through lymphoma. I went through chemotherapy. About halfway through that, I looked like death warmed over. And I was at church one day about halfway through that, and a guy comes up to me and says, "What kind of cancer do you have?" And I said, "I have lymphoma." And he said, "Oh, yeah, my cousin had that, killed him." Have a good day. Okay. I felt good the rest of the day. Slept well that night. Don't do that. It's from one extreme to the other. I just heard some terrible things when these kind of things are happening to people. And when it happened to me, I heard something. Now, I heard something that was a lot more serious. I was sitting in the cancer ward one day waiting my turn to get pumped up full of poison. And there's a whole bunch of us, even children, sit around. That's a sad place to be. If you've ever been in a cancer ward, sad place to be. There was a lady there. She was sitting right close to me. I could see her, and a couple of guys came in, and I just knew they were from church. And they sat down on the other side of her, and I could hear some of the conversation. And they were basically telling her this: if you just had more faith, you could be healed. Gosh, if I hadn't have been half dead myself, I'd have got up and said something. That's ridiculous. Don't say things like that. They don't know that. We don't know that, okay? Don't say things like that. Be comforting to folks, as Jesus was. Don't try to answer the why questions. Just be there. That's why it leads to the fourth thing I want to talk about, and that's comfort. And that's what I'm talking about here. God will comfort us with his presence and with his patience if we'll just let him. And we may not get the answer. That's what the whole book of Job is about. Job never got the answers. But he knew God was there with him. God assured him he was there with him. He would be there with him. Let me read something from Chuck Swindoll that I just saw this past week. The late, and I might add great, Joe Bailey and his wife, Mary Lou, lost 3 children. They lost one son following surgery when he was only 18 days old. They lost a second boy at age 5 because of leukemia. Then they lost a third son at 18 years of age after a sledding accident because of complications related to hemophilia. Joe writes in a wonderful book, The Last Thing We Talk About. He says this: "I was sitting torn by grief. Someone came and talked to me of God's dealings, of why it happened, of hope beyond the grave. He talked constantly. He said things I knew were true, but I was unmoved, except I just wished he'd go away. He finally did. Another came and sat beside me, and he didn't talk. He didn't ask leading questions. He just sat beside me for an hour or more, listened to when I said something, answered briefly, prayed, simply left. I was moved. I was comforted. I hated to see him go. You've done it right when those in agony hate to see you go. Wise words. Wise words. We need to walk beside those who are suffering with our presence, not our answers. If you don't get anything else, with our presence, not our answers. How important that is. That is part of our ministry as followers of Jesus, is to be there with them, with the presence of God, and let them know we love them. Which leads to the last thing, and that's relationship. The journey of trust builds on a relationship that's sustained and nourished over time. If we don't build that relationship over time, it won't sustain us during trials and difficulties. Jesus is basically telling Martha this: don't focus your eyes on your present circumstances of life. Focus them on me. Focus them on me. This is so true in all of life. You know, relationships, especially relationships of trust, are built over time. And the trust should deepen over time so that we know at whatever point we have these difficulties that the one we're trusting is definitely trustworthy, is going to be there for us. Now, my wife and I have been married 54 years. I was 12 when I got married. No, I'm not. We've been married a long time, okay? We've been married a long time. We got married as teenagers. We actually did do that. We got married as teenagers. Now, over all of those years, we've had difficulties. We had struggles. But as of today, we have a deep, deep trust in one another. And I know that she'll be there for me no matter what happens to me, and she knows I'll be there for her no matter what happens to her. That's just our relationship. That's just the way it is. Well, it should be the same way with God. If we're trusting in God, if we know him, if we followed him, if we've walked with him on these journeys of life that we're talking about, this journey of trust, then we know he'll be there too. He will always be there. So there may be times in our life when the presence of God is all we have to lean on. Lean on it. Lean on it. He will be there with you during whatever struggle that you are going through. After the service, Joanna is our pastor to families. Joanna and I will be up here if you need to have someone to pray with you, to talk to someone, to make a next step, and whatever that might be, we'll be up here for you. But we're going to have a song here at the end. It's called Oceans, and it's a beautiful song. And one of the refrains in this song, I want you to sing this. The reason I'm saying this, I want you to sing this song like a prayer, Because one of the refrains in this is, Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Lead me to where my trust is without borders. That is rich. I love that. If I'd have saw that sooner, I'd made that the title of this sermon. Lead me where my trust is without borders. Don't put a box around your faith or around God. God is bigger than any box you will ever create. Allow your trust to move outside the borders of that box.
On the road again. Just can't wait to get on the road again. The life I love is making music with my friends.